This is Yummy Pajama Man, and today we're going to learn about calculating a running total or an accumulator, and then sentinels, and then finally input validation loops. So starting today, I'm going to go up here and say def main parentheses colon. We've seen that a lot, and then in the body of the main we're defining it, and then down to here we have the function named main that we defined up here, and then we call it down here. So in order to call any function, you have to say the function name parentheses what to pass to the parameters. But since I'm not passing anything, since I didn't have anything defined in here that I'm passing into, that's why I don't pass anything. So it's just main parentheses when I call the main function. So inside of the main function, we're going to look at first the accumulator. And so I lost it. An accumulator is a variable that keeps a running total in your program. So down here you can see that total plus number, and so whatever the variable number is assigned, and whatever the variable total is assigned, those two values will be added together with the plus operator. And so since these two will be plus together, these two values, which will be one value, will be assigned to the variable named total. Remember, anything on the right side of the assignment operator will do its own process, and once that process is done, it'll assign on the left side of the assignment operator to the variable. Okay, you do not do mathematical processes on the left side. You can't do that. Only on the right side can you do mathematical operations. I would like to say that, operations. So after doing the mathematical operations, it'll assign to total here. Another way to write this out actually is to use a augmented operator to calculate a running total. So to use a augmented operator for this one right here, which is equivalent to the one above, I would want to type in total plus or equal to number, and you can put a space if you want. So this statement right here is equivalent to this statement above. This is the what did I say? Augmented operator right here. So this is equivalent to saying total is equal to total plus number, just like the one above. If you wanted to do total minus, you can do that. Just change the one down here to a minus. If you wanted to do total times number, shift, so times, down here you change this to times. If you want to do total divided by number, do divide by. Down here you say total is equal to total divide by number, and that's how you can do that. So it'll do its mathematical operations here, and then it'll assign it to its variable on the left side, which is total. But in this case, we're actually going to total the numbers. So each time we iterate through here, we want to keep a running total. That's why I call my variable total. So I'm going to keep it as plus. And I'm going to remove this because we don't want to do it twice. Since this is the same thing as this, I'm just going to keep the augmented operator. This is the augmented operator. Control S to save. So that's the accumulator. So that's how you can, each time you iterate through a loop, for example, you can add to a running total. My running total, or the accumulator, is total right here, as you'll see later on when I use this. Now we're going to see the sentinels. So sentinels are right here. The sentinel is a special value that marks the end of a sequence. So our sentinel variable is number. So what's so special about a sentinel is that you can actually do two things, or search, or actually do I would like to say two criterias at once. So let me think real quick. Enter a value or 0 to quit. So right down here, I input and I asked for the prompt, enter a value or 0 to quit, and then it waits for me to type a value or 0 to quit right here. And then it'll go into the int built-in function, assign in an integer, and then be assigned to number. And I'll go over this one later, but let's pretend like this isn't here. So if this was the last line right here and I said 5 instead of 0, it'll assign to number 5. And if this was the last line in the while loop for this one, that means it goes back up here and says while 5 is greater than 0, which is true. It'll go through the loop again, and then it'll be 5, which this whole thing is equivalent to total equal to total plus 5, which total is 0.0 for the first iteration. So that means that total here after the first iteration, since I inputted number as being 5 down here, total is going to be 5. Okay. And so down here, I'm asking enter a value or 0 to quit. Let's say on my second iteration I said 0 to quit. So now I assign 0 to number over here. Now let's say that this doesn't exist. Okay. So this is the last line number. So I go back up to here to the while loop, or the while clause, and I test my condition. So I said 0. So while 0 is greater than 0, this will return false because 0 isn't greater than 0. So it'll get out of the while loop completely. And then down here it'll say print the total is 5, because that's the last value that was assigned to total here. Okay, so what we did was we killed 2 birds with 1 stone using a sentinel value. Okay. And yes, sentinel values are very, very flexible as well. So as you can see, it's either enter a valid value or enter 0 to quit. So that's 2 options in one variable here, and then it tests the expression here, whether or not to get out, or put it into the total accumulator here. So that's the sentinel right here. If we didn't use a sentinel, I would have said enter a value, and then after saying enter a value down here, I would have said like question, assignment operator, did like a input. If I wasn't using a sentinel value, I would have said, do you want to continue, space. Let's pretend like this isn't here. And then I would have like, so assign the question. So up here I would put in my question. So question, assignment operator, y. So for y. So do you want to continue, and then put in yes, or y for yes. And obviously they might put in uppercase Y, but let's just forget about that right now. And so I input something after the question here, so I input something right here, which will go into the input function. I said Y, and so I want my question now to be here. So instead of number greater than 0, I want it to be while question is a quality operator Y. So it'll be while question assignment operator Y, and then you would do a logical operator or question equality operator capital Y, because you know I might put in a capital Y. So if I put in a capital Y here and assign it to question, it'll change the value. It won't be lowercase y, it'll be uppercase Y. So it tests the condition while question equality operator lowercase y or question equality operator uppercase Y. If I put uppercase Y here, it'll run through the loop again. Okay. Now pretend like we don't have or 0 to quit. As you can see, this is more complicated because I had to use an or logical operator, and I had to test 2 conditions here. I also had to put in another statement here to ask the question if you wanted to get out of the loop. So instead of doing all that, you can put it in here. You can ask the question or enter a value into the same place, and then test the value that you are putting into number, and then that's it. You wouldn't have this if you had a sentinel, and you wouldn't have an extra expression to evaluate. So instead of having all that, I want to use a sentinel. Number is number, while number is greater than 0 right here. Remove this question entirely because we use a sentinel. It's enter a value or 0 to quit, and then remove this up here as well. And yeah, so sentinels are so much better because sentinel, you either enter a value or press or 0 to quit, because it's still testing. It's testing what you inputted at the very end. If this wasn't here, it's testing what you put into number before it goes into the running total. If what you entered into here was 0 to quit, and it goes up here while 0 is greater than 0, this will be false, and it'll get out of the loop before you go to the accumulator. Obviously, putting a 0 in the accumulator doesn't really matter, but let's say if I had a -1 here, which I won't do, but let's just say hypothetically I had -1 and I had no way to get out of this loop. If this was false, that -1 would go down here, and that would be really bad. Okay, so that's why I purposely say, okay, I want to get out of the loop if it's actually equal to 0. So, which I'll explain down here. So down here, our next topic that we're going to talk about is the input validation that I have here and up here. So before you go into this main while loop right here, we have to input our number into the variable named number. This is a whole syntax that you use in order to make the while loop work. So what you need is the variable, right? I have the variable here. Let's say this isn't here, and then you have the while. Test the condition for that variable that you entered into. If that returns true, go into the while loop. If that variable that we did above the while clause returns false, well, you don't go into the body. If I input it into number and this expression is true, we're in the body of the while loop. Now I have to have some way to get out of the while loop body here. In order to get out of the while loop body here, I have to have something at the very end. If we just ignore this, I have to have something at the end that will change the variable state up here. So to potentially get out of the while loop, I have to use the variable again. So in order to get out of the while loop, it has to be 0, or if we just ignore this, or less than 0 to quit down here. If this didn't exist. So what you need for a while loop is your variable first that you're going to test, and then you have your while clause that you're testing that variable that you defined up here. And then once you're in the while loop, you have to have some way to get out of the while loop. So then you have to have that variable again, but it's going to be at the end of the while loop, because this variable number is going to determine whether or not this is going to return either true or false. Okay, so you need this, and this at the end, this at the beginning. Now, what's different than what I was talking about is this input validation right here, and this input validation right here. This input validation tests to see if what I entered is greater than 0. Because if what I entered into number is greater than 0, it will never go into this body. But if I put bad values into the variable named number, like -5, I just want all positive numbers in my program. And so if I put -5 up here, it'll go down here and test to see if -5 is less than 0 in the expression, which it is, so it's true. It'll go down here and say print, you cannot have a value less than 0. At the end of the while loop, you see that I'm I have the potential to change it, which obviously I'll change it with the input. So enter a valid value or 0 to quit. So let's say I said -4 again. -4 is assigned a number. Up here is -4 less than 0, goes through the while loop again. If I gave it a valid value down here, like 2 for example, I assign 2 to number here, goes back up to here and says while 2 is less than 0, this expression will be false. So that means this body will, this body will get out because 2 less than 0 is not true. I use this to validate my input to prevent the variable number from being assigned a negative number. Okay, so this is why this is here, to prevent negative numbers from being assigned to number. Also down here is the same thing. Okay, is to prevent negative numbers from being assigned to number as well. So if I put enter a value or 0 to quit, if I put -5 will go into number. It'll go down here like it did up here, and it'll go into the while loop right here. So while -5 is less than 0, this will be true. It'll go into the body right here and say you cannot have a value less than 0. And then I have to input a valid value. So if I input a valid value again, let's say I input 5 will be assigned a number, goes back up to here, this will return true and then accumulate. But let's say I said 0 because it says enter a valid value or 0 to quit. So let's say that I said 0 down here. So 0 will be assigned to variable named number here. Now we're at the end of the while loop. It goes back up here and tests the number, which is 0, that I inputted for. And so it'll be while 0 greater than 0, this expression will return false. Because you can't have the same number greater than the same number. So it'll get out of the while loop entirely. So then it goes down to here and says print the total is total. Man, that was a lot. So yeah, so we just learned about calculating a running total here, and obviously I put a comment down here just to remind me, so we don't need that. And we also learned about sentinels, and so sentinels right here, because a sentinel, you can enter a valid value or 0 to quit. It gives you one of two options, and is tested up here in the expression here. So that's a sentinel. Always use a sentinel if you can. It'll make your program a lot easier to read and manageable. So I'm going to read off my paper. So the reason why you want to use a sentinel instead of what I was doing before with the lowercase y and the uppercase y, don't do that. The reason why you don't want to do that is because a sentinel value must be distinct from other values. So a sentinel value is what ends the loop. So that's what I was talking about. The sentinel value has the potential to end the loop here. Also, you have to make sure that your sentinel value makes sense. So my sentinel value in order to end a loop was 0, right? So it makes sense to assign my sentinel value to number 0 because you can't accumulate 0, right? So that's why I use 0 to get out of the loop for my sentinel. Let's say if you are a nurse and you have a patient come in and you weigh them on a scale. So you have a program that calculates their scale, and within the program it asks, do you want to calculate another weight in the program? And in order to calculate another weight, you have to give in a valid value here, or for that patient, if you want to stop the while loop entirely up here, you would have to say enter a valid value or -1 to quit, because obviously the patient can't be -1 in weight, right? So if I change this to -1 and number is not equal to -1, that'll be my sentinel value, -1, for a patient that I'm weighing. So if I wanted to end entirely, instead of putting in and a valid value, I say -1. But in this case, my sentinel value is 0. That's my distinct value. That's what's going to bring me out of the while loop if I use it. So yeah, that's sentinel values. And also, if the user, like me, if I was running the program, does not know how many iterations to use a sentinel value. This whole program can be run or iterate as many times as it can, because I said before in other tutorials that the reason why you want to use a while loop is so that you have the potential to iterate infinitely. So this program can iterate 8 times, or it can iterate 16 or 24. It can iterate however many times it wants to, thanks to the sentinel value here. It gives the user the choice without actually asking the user whether or not they want to continue, which is annoying, or asking the user to give the number of iterations, which is maybe the user doesn't know how many times it needs to iterate. So sentinel values are good if the user doesn't know, and the programmer himself or herself doesn't know how many times this while loop will iterate. So use a sentinel value for that example. And there was one more thing before I go. I know I say that a lot. So let's go back to functions again as a review. So why would someone want to use a function in a program? One main reason why someone would want to use a function in a program is because if you have statements that are repeating in your program, as you can see in my program, you would want to put it into a function. So you'll probably see what's repeating, right? So what's repeating in my program, or the statements that are repeating, are this all the way down to here, and then this one all the way down to here. These two statements that I highlighted are repeating. So since they are repeating, you would want to put them into a function to tidy up your program even more. That's one main reason why you want to use a function if you're repeating statements over and over again, if it's not in a while loop, and if it's not in a for loop. So since I have these statements repeating here and down here, I want to put it into a function. So let's define our function. We can actually put it in here, but I'll put it outside of the function. So I'll put it before. So we'll do def, and we'll call our new function as validate input, parentheses, because we're not passing anything to it. We're just going to run what's in the body. And then we're going to put our repeating lines of code, which is this one and this one, into here. So we want to copy, so copy all of this, and then Control V to put it into here. So now we define our function name validate input. So we can delete this right here. So let me think. So delete this, and then in the place of deleting it, I want to call the function validate input parentheses. Now down here it's repeating again. Same thing up here. I want to delete this and then replace it with validate input parentheses. Save, and then back this up. And make sure this is the same indentation under the main, because this is part of the main definition. And so what happened is I define my validate input. So since it's defined, now I'm defining my main down here. And so after I define everything, down here I call main function. So then it jumps back up here into main, runs all this, goes to here, and sees if it's in memory. Yes, it's in memory because I defined it up here. and then it'll go down here and then sees this again. Yes, it's in memory as well. Make sure you define your functions before you call the function. As you can see, I defined it before actually calling it. If I put this definition of the function, which I talked about before, after calling the main function, it wouldn't work because it stops here and then goes into here, but this isn't in memory. So that's why I have to define this first up here. So run module, invalid syntax. Oh, colon. I'm sorry. That's right, colon. And okay, so we're going to go through the loop, and I'm going to show you my input validation. Enter a value or 0 to quit. So we are actually, so it's initialized, we're into here, so we're right here. Enter a value or 0 to quit, and I want to go into my input validation. So it'll be -6. You cannot have a value less than, and then it'll loop again and again. And I give it 5. Oh, I'm sorry. Enter a valid value or 0 to quit, and global name number is not defined because why? Okay, so I figured it out. So global name number is not defined. So in order to do this, I actually have to return something from this function, which we haven't discussed, unfortunately. So I won't discuss it now because I don't want to confuse you, and this video is running at like, I think upwards of 30 minutes. So I'll come back to function to return a value, but I won't discuss it right now. So if we just get rid of everything, sorry about that, and bring everything back, and then run this program again. So yeah, the reason why I did that is because I would have to actually return a value, and I don't want to do that right now, so I'll do that later. But yeah, the program should work right now, and I hope you learned a lot. I'll stop right now, and I'll see you in the next tutorial coming up after this.